Well, Hugh Bennett is Deputy Editor at the BrexitCentral website, which specialises in all the news surrounding the UK's departure from the EU. Joins me now from Central London, our Central London studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm not sure how much you heard of that report there by Lisa Holland, but obviously that move by the Sephardic Jews to gain dual citizenship, is that something that surprises you in the wake of Brexit?
Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable for people who are entitled to and want to claim dual nationality to do so. A number of my close family have dual nationality in Malaysia and Britain. And I think it's great that people are actually connecting with their heritage. In some ways, Brexit seems to have inspired this. But overall, I think this is part of a lot of what we saw with the economy, where people were determined to really look only at the worst case scenarios and assume that everyone's worst fears are going to be realised. And I think the idea that there's going to be some sort of draconian barriers put in place between the UK and the EU after Brexit, that's clearly not going to happen.
But the problem is we don't know exactly what's going to happen. There is room for interpretation. Negotiations haven't even commenced as yet. So people are wanting to cover all bases. You can't really blame them for that.
No, of course. And I think what we'd all like to see is the situation with UK citizens already living in the EU and vice versa, which Theresa May has already offered the EU a deal on, and they've pushed back on that. But hopefully that is something that we can get agreed very early on in the negotiations. When you look at the current situation, though, I mean, there are millions of UK citizens already living and working all across the world, whether it's in Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong. As many British citizens live in Australia now as do in the entire EU. And I think the idea that it's going to be harder to live and work just across the channel than it is to go halfway around the world to do so, whatever the arrangements are, they're not going to be as difficult as that.
So you sound quite optimistic about negotiations to come in terms of free movement of people, in terms of work, studying also, that's something to take into the equation. You seem to think that really it's not going to be that bad.
Well, I think clearly there has to be a balance, because obviously the other side of UK citizens moving freely into the EU is that means uncontrolled movement of EU citizens into the UK. And clearly the Brexit vote was a vote to take back control of immigration, to actually put in place a more balanced and fair immigration policy that doesn't discriminate firstly against people who don't happen to be born in the EU. You have non-EU citizens being discriminated against. And just restoring a sense of balance so that there isn't undue pressure being put on public services and communities in Britain, and also that there isn't pressure being put on the economies where people are coming from and actually leaving countries without enough labour, which is hurting their economic development in other parts of Europe.
That cloud of uncertainty does still hang over proceedings, and we've got some countries looking to draw back on the Schengen Agreement.
Yeah, no, and I think this highlights another point really, which is that the EU is not this utopia where free movement is functioning perfectly. Obviously, Schengen has had a lot of issues since the terrorist atrocities of the last couple of years. A lot of countries have de facto suspended Schengen, and right now in the German Parliament they're talking about bringing in benefits bans for migrants. The Austrian Chancellor earlier this week said that he wanted to introduce a law to prioritise giving Austrian jobs to Austrian people before EU migrants. So I think the idea that all you need to do is get an EU passport and you have this magical access to live and work wherever you want in the EU just doesn't quite hold up to scrutiny, even at the moment.
Another areas to look at, obviously the return possibly of work permits for employees. We have to think about reciprocal healthcare agreements. These are all things that we'll be taking into consideration for people living on either side.
Yeah, well, I think it's very much in both sides' interest to come to a good agreement, particularly on people who are already living in the EU or in the UK. And obviously there are far more EU citizens living in the UK than the other way round. So again, this is one where it's very much in the ball is in the EU's court to actually make a good deal for their citizens, and I'm sure they will, because I don't think they're going to do anything that would unduly harm the interests of their citizens already living in the UK.
And particularly, how do you think it will affect, or what might the effect be for students in particular? We've heard that many people are worried within academia about the Erasmus scheme, for instance.
Yeah, well, I think the Erasmus scheme is a great example of cooperation that works very well outside the strict structures of the EU, because the Erasmus programme already includes a number of non-EU countries as full members. And when you look at Britain, I think Britain has 7 of the top 10 universities in Europe are in Britain. I don't think that the European Union is going to want to cut off access for its students to Britain's universities. And I think that's something. Yet again, it's something that the UK and the EU will agree that we derive a huge amount of benefit from, and there's every reason to continue it.
Okay, Hugh Bennett, thanks for speaking to us. Hugh Bennett,
Thanks very
Deputy
much.
Editor at Brexit Central.